I would like to be known. If I can't be broadcaster and commentator, Hamish Hunter, I'd like to be known as TV funny man.
Do you want me to get you one of these?
I was going to say, become a professional dreg. That's what you need to do, Hamish.
I am a professional. Believe me, I have the best drag.
Come on, get the cards out. Show me your cards.
Hello everyone and welcome to another special episode of Political Dregs. I'm Joel, here with our regular panel, Amir Sajadi, Calvin Robinson, the legend, and Hampstead's Hamish Hunter. How are you, Hampstead?
Hi Joel, how are you?
Very good. Well, tonight we've got another big topic to discuss. I believe we've made a lot of hay with the topic of free speech and what we can and can't say, and obviously now the next inevitable follow-up from that really is what do we do with the fact that we have a state-funded broadcaster in this country, funded by our taxes, that has a huge amount of influence clearly over the entire media landscape and culture, and it is actually taxpayer funded. So I know that's going to inevitably become a new topic that we discuss on Dregs. Calvin, what do you think about that status of our broadcast culture in this country?
I'm on board with the Defund the BBC campaign, and I think our main aims are that we want to educate people, let people know how and why you can cancel your TV license, what you can still watch if you do that, and what you can't watch. We want to decriminalise the TV licence for non-payment. The non-payment fee is horrendous. I'll get into some of the reasons for that later. But also, we want to get a commitment from the government to change the charter so that the BBC's remit only covers BBC channels and BBC content. So they're the three main aims of the Defund the BBC campaign.
What's that last one? I don't understand.
So the remit for the license only covers literally content that is produced for and by the BBC. At the moment, it's got a wider remit.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, how about does that cover the ridiculous salaries they pay to the likes of Gary Lineker? I mean, that it's a state service, so they should not be able to charge those sort of commercial salaries.
It's incredibly bloated, isn't it? There's a huge amount of waste there with these salaries that they shouldn't be matching.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm not sure I agree with that particularly, because if you're going to say that we're going to do sports coverage, then you're going to want to get big names doing that, and you're going to have to pay commensurate prices. I think there's a lot...
But not for a guaranteed audience. For Lineker, it's a complete waste of money. In league football on a Saturday night, you could present it, Hamish, and you'd get the same figures as he does. Honestly,
I'd be very good actually at.
I'm sure you would, and I'm sure you do it for at least 2/3 of the salary. So I think it would be.
And I don't think anyone wants to hear us quibble over particular programs, but I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with some of the bloated nature of the BBC, and I do have a problem with the license fee structure as it currently is, and the criminality. What I don't quite understand is this campaign that you're launching. It's called Defund the BBC, and which obviously sounds quite dramatic,
sexy,
but nothing that you've said it relates to defunding, which isn't a word anyway, to cutting the funding or dismantling or privatising the BBC. And that's the real nub of the issue. What's your view on the BBC?
Well, I mean, I'm a fan of the BBC. I think they produce a lot of good content. I'm not a fan of their business model, and I think it's very outdated. When the BBC launched, things were a lot different to how they are now. They covered a lot of the live content that was streamed out. Now they cover a very small minority of it. Viewing options have changed with Sky and Virgin and Netflix and Now TV, and all of these things, they're not taken into consideration. But it's not just about the money. It's like the criminalisation of it is important. When we look at crime rates in this country, I think women cover about 20% of all crimes, whereas it's very disproportionate in this because 70% of all prosecutions for the BBC licence fee are women. I don't know what's going on there either. There's so many aspects to this to consider.
Well, you don't have to defund it to deal with that, but yeah, Amir, what are you going to say?
I mean, I have a trump card here because I happen to work for the BBC once upon a time in my life.
What, were you security?
No, actually, I worked on Space Online, and I worked on certain programs like Tomorrow's World, Horizon, Teletubbies. I was making the website back in the day. This is like
Which one were you? Tinky Winky or Dipstick?
the one with the big fat beard. So I'm just kidding.
I'm glad you said beard.
Yeah. So obviously, I have a little bit of an insight into the BBC, and I think many could argue that I'm a bit biased, but I'm not biased. I agree to some extent that the license fee and the way it's administered is archaic. It's almost, for me, it's almost like the poll tax. It's forcing people to pay regardless of how many people use it and whether someone can afford it. So in that respect, I think that it requires change. I think the Defund the BBC, kind of the slogan is quite sexy, it's catchy, and it's actually quite misleading, because what we really require for the BBC is a change of the business model. Simple as that. We need them to participate in competition in the free market. And if they were to do that, I think the program quality would improve. I think people's personal agendas will be less prevalent. And I think going forward, you actually end up with better quality programs and better quality presenters and actors and just shows in general.
It's allowed to compete, you're saying, but then they'd be charging even more to their staff and talent and be demanding even more on the charter fee. So that's
the quality of, BBC has the potential to make a heck of a lot of money, really. Some of the programs that are coming out of the BBC in the past, like Walking with Diners, Walking with Beasts, which I worked on, they have the potential to go in this market today with the internet, the potential to go global. They can make a lot of money.
Those are tremendous, but they're part of the fabric of the country because it's been invested in over the years. So I would be a little bit more wary of scrapping it completely. I would think we could, ask it to be more responsive to the taxpayer who it funds, and to reflect and to stay out of some of the ridiculous politicking that it gets involved in, and also be more conscious of some of the pay that it has. I think we can seek to reform it from the inside. Who said that before?
I was going to say that's ridiculous.
But, we have a conservative government with an 80-seat majority.
Yeah,
this can happen in an instant. They can legislate. The BBC can be transformed in its entirety at the core of its fabric without these nonsense kind of defund the police
it's
or
a strange
defund the
institution
BBC slogans.
I just think, like defund the police, I'm very suspicious of a slogan like this, because I think it's seeking to dismantle an institution potentially with far-reaching consequences. But I do think there are some structural issues that definitely need to be changed from the BBC. And if you said defund Lineker, I'd be 100% on board.
But I will say it isn't misleading. It is talking about defunding. It is taking away the taxpayer business model that is on threat of criminalisation. I think that's an important part of the slogan to get that across.
You're not saying, I'm not hearing the words privatise the BBC, abolish the licence fee. So I'm quite sad, really, because I was going to give a proper Hampstead liberal defence of the BBC as an institution. But I don't feel like I need to, which is quite happy.
Well, indeed,
I want to talk about BBC News, or rather just the news division generally, which I think is quite important and has come in for a lot of stick over the past few years. Obviously, with the referendum campaign, everyone's saying that they were biased one way or another. But of course, over the Savile and Lord McAlpine cock-ups at Newsnight in particular. I was recently reading during lockdown John Humphrey's memoir, A Day Like Today, and he said something which I agree with, that he thinks that every BBC news producer should know how their staff or the editor should know how their producers vote, or generally what their worldview is, because he concedes that there is a left liberal bias in the BBC, and that is not good. He said, for example, that nobody at the BBC could really conceive of how anyone would want to vote to leave the European Union. And I think that's right. And I think we do see a lot of that. And it's not, I don't think it's overt campaigning bias that we see at the BBC, but I think we see an attitude and a mindset that is not representative of the country and therefore doesn't quite get things. I don't want to see the BBC become Fox News or indeed MSNBC. And one of the things I really value about the BBC output that I would really miss are especially some of the things on Radio 4. You have programs like The Moral Maze that you just never get on commercial radio.
And having no adverts. I mean, this is an absolutely golden point that no other channel in the world can compete with, having no adverts whatsoever.
You're wrong, Joel, because I pay £11 a month to have no adverts on YouTube. I pay to have no adverts on Now TV. But
you pay for those
I opt in. I can opt in. Whereas with the BBC,
no, sure, and that might be something that they need to shift to ultimately. I mean, it is a subscription service in the sense that it's subscribed through through your taxes, and then the charter that's given to it. Maybe something needs to shift there, but I think retaining that function of a sort of national funded broadcaster that can produce this ad-free content is pretty unique, whether we like it or not.
One thing I would say is I do think that it overextends its reach in some ways. So BBC Online is rampant. I mean, the reach of the BBC website, and you look at some of the things on the BBC website, and you think, well, can't you get this sort of content on Mail Online or BuzzFeed, as was, and those sorts of things? But in the world of arts, in the world of music and culture, really important stuff that the BBC does. I'm sorry, but there is no Today programme anywhere else. I know Calvin loves his talk radio and people like LBC, but I'm sorry, I am a middle class, middle age old queen, and I need my Today programme.
Sure, but they've become more commercialised and they've stepped away from what their traditional remit was, and they are chasing what the commercial stations are doing as well, which is a problem. And you mentioned Brexit. We've seen the same thing with Black Lives Matter, this bias that they have. They need more diversity there. And everyone keeps going back to the business model. I'm not saying that they need to have a particular business model. I'm not saying they need to take the Netflix approach or take an advertised model. That's up to them. There should be a consultation there somewhere in the government on how we could still make money. Like Amir says, there's a global audience there. There must be a way of continuing the traditional BBC programs that we all know and love and that we've lost a lot of, and getting some of that back while also maintaining some independence.
And you're right, the BBC is obsessed with diversities that don't matter. It's obsessed about regional accents and skin colour and all of those things. And the thing that it is most woeful at is diversity of thought. I can think of 2, maybe 3 right-wingers in the BBC News just over history. Andrew Neil, Jeremy Paxman, and Justin Webb on Radio 4, and
he's just about right wing. He's not.
And so what we do need, you absolutely right. And BBC comedy, BBC current affairs comedy is woeful. It is
terrible.
Absolutely you can't. It's ungovernable.
Propaganda.
That we pay for Nish Kumar is another one. Add him. Defund Nish Kumar,
please.
So
what's interesting, Hamish, is that
the diversity officers need to actually get their
Hamish, what's interesting is that when I was in the Conservatives, I would hear about the criticism of the BBC, how they're all left-wing this and left-wing that, and they're rubbish and they're crap and they're shit. And then when I joined the Lib Dems, it was the same message, it was the same mantra, it was the same narrative. It's like, BBC's rubbish, BBC's shit, BBC's crap. And I was like, what the fuck? We're in the Lib Dems, the BBC are pro-EU, and yet you're criticising the BBC. I was like, I didn't make a deal of it. I was just curious. I was just wondering to myself, what's going on? The Conservatives are critical. The Lib Dems are now critical because they don't want to hear Farage. Maybe the problem is that our society is become so engaged in their tunnel vision of their point of view, and they're just unable to see and accept or listen or to hear other people. And so when someone does come on like Farage on the BBC, so before the general election, I think Farage came on quite a lot, and all I could hear in the chat channels was, you know, the Lib Dems were like, oh, this is wrong, this is bad, this is shit, this is crap. And he led the greatest success for a brand new party in the EU election since forever. Like, he earned the right to be on that platform. So I couldn't understand. And I think the problem is that our society has become so illiberal, people have become so confused as to what liberal means, and they don't quite understand that it means the willingness to listen and to accept and to understand that people have different fucking views. I mean, how hard can it be? This is part of the problem.
And I think there's some element of the fact that people do feel an ownership over the BBC, and so they feel that it especially ought to be responsive to them. Now, I think that's probably a good thing, but there is a statue of George Orwell outside New Broadcasting House, on the top of Regent Street, with his quotation from the preface of Animal Farm, which is the definition of liberalism is being allowed to tell people things they don't want to hear. And the BBC needs to remember that. And it also needs to be a little bit more confident. It's sometimes a little too conservative with a small c, as in risk averse. You know, some of the stuff that it put out, it used BBC Three as a way to, in terms of comedy and stuff. It was actually really, really good and subversive, and it just needs it needs to stop doing everything for everybody and actually start doing the things that it does: news, culture, arts, sport. You know, absolutely, environment, drama, really well, and it just needs to remember that.
Because essentially, the things it does do so well are when it actually promotes the traditional cultural elements of British life, the royal weddings that they put on, election night coverage, as it used to be, you know, funerals of state funerals, things like that. Great national occasions, it actually does very well. So it's a shame that the editorial side, the leadership, have become so embroiled in these sort of controversies about, you know.
So to get some new people in there, get some new people. I can't believe we're saying
I have one serious criticism.
Everyone there is an Oxbridge graduate who did, you know.
Get us on there.
I think I take over as Director General of the BBC tomorrow.
I'm sure you would. So to wrap up, can we get a statement from you guys if you agree with the main three aims of the Defund the BBC campaign? Do you agree that they need to better educate people on how they can cancel their licence if they want to and what they can still watch? Do you agree that we need to decriminalise the licence fee? And do you agree that we need to change the commitment from the government to alter the remit of the charter so that BBC only covers BBC content and channels?
No, yes, yes.
Amir?
Which one was the first one again?
Educate on how to cancel your licence and what you can still watch on TV, that you don't need to have a licence for every use case of the television.
I think I'm in agreement with Hamish. Yes, yes.
I'd go no, yes. So I'm not. Are you?
So you don't want to decriminalise?
Okay, no, yes, fine.
Okay.
But
I would say the last two aims are the most important ones, so it's good.
No, yes. I mean, given the raging criminality that we have in this country, anyway, what's the point of having BBC?
Why are we clogging up courts with people that haven't paid their licence fee? It's ridiculous.
Can I just
time in the magistrates' court?
Yeah, why?
But obviously, it would ultimately become a criminal matter if you continually refuse to pay your fine, wouldn't it? So I'm not sure how that would work.
But I don't see how it's going to help if someone gets this.
Because you could be fined.
CJJ, if someone gets taken, I mean, that's just as bad. They're going to be, their credit ratings, in fact, they won't be able to get any loans or mortgages or anything for 6 years.
I wouldn't mind it if it's treated like parking fines, I suppose. But that ultimately, if you refuse to pay your ticket forever,
something I would say is that the biggest consumers of the BBC are older people, because they watch TV, listen to the radio more because they're not out at work or at school. I don't agree that over 75s should automatically have a free licence fee. obviously there are exceptions in terms of means testing the very poor, but actually I think it'd be really good for old people to start paying the license fee, because then they have some financial clout and able to exercise some control and influence over the BBC.
So how about making the BBC a co-op? Whoever pays has a vote, and they determine the direction of BBC. And then also the other thing I wanted to mention, which we haven't talked about, is that BBC Worldwide is actually funded by the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and it's subsidized by the taxpayer. So there is actually quite I wouldn't say sinister, but other countries would argue sinister agenda for BBC Worldwide.
But it's so important. The World Service is one of the great soft bits of our diplomacy, and I think one of the sad things that has happened recently is the cutbacks in the World Service.
Like the royal family, it should be slimmed down but focused on delivering for the country and extolling soft power, I would say.
And none of these woke people like Meghan in it.
Well, she's out, so yeah, indeed. Good
fantastic conclusion there, Joel. Good place to end it.
So yeah, thanks everyone for that. Another great episode. I've been Joel. We've also got Calvin, Amir, and Hamish. Thanks very much for the discussion, chaps, and we'll see you all again soon.
And follow.
Please do, indeed, follow us if you can, if you could be so kind. Like, share, and subscribe.
Echo,
if you're of that wing, which is fine. Enjoy Parlay.
Evo love.
Good night.
Shall we say hello to some friends of this show? I'll say hello to my good mate Matt, who was at university with me, big woke lefty, but watched our episode on LGBT, and we had a good old chat on Facebook Messenger about it. He used words like intersection a little bit too much, but it was nice to have a proper debate with him and to catch up with him. So thank you very much, Matt, for watching.
I'd like to say hello to Rod Umlas, who is from Central Michigan, a fan of the show. Hi, Rod. Thanks for your comments, and keep watching. Studied drama at Cornell University. There you go. So
is he voting Democrat or Republican? Put it in a comment, Rob.
Let us know. Let us know, Rod. Yeah.
He studied drama at Cornell. I think he was Democrat.
Well, he's from Michigan, key state. So yeah, we'll just do let us know who you're voting for, Rod.
Okay, I would like to give it 2 shouts out. One to Liberal Elite, who's been commenting a lot on Twitter. Had an argument with Hamish a couple of days ago. Hamish almost blocked him, but didn't. He said, by the way, just listen to your podcast while I work this Arvo, whatever it is, and Pride one is really interesting. Looking forward to one on BLM, which is queued up next. Enjoying hearing Hamish and Calvin's views on intersectionality and boxes. Really important points.
Thank you.
Only real criticism on format is you and Joel need to speak more, butt in and get involved. Joel?
There you go. We're speaking. But thank you for your comments.
And number two,
oh, sorry.
Number 2, my university friend, I saw that she subscribed on YouTube, Claire White. So cheers, mate.
Brilliant. I'll give a quick shout out to Chris Alley, who I know watches. Very sound from Kensal Rise.
Good man.